Hi, I'm going to reflect on the unit titled Working Ethically in the Aboriginal Community. Before beginning this unit, I had ignorantly assumed that colonialism in Australia was a term used in past tense. This unit has taught me that Indigenous people continue to fight for self-determination despite the forced removal of their children, racist stereotypes reinforced by media, racist government policies that discriminate and oppress Indigenous populations, and also racist people in the community. This unit has given me a deeper understanding and appreciation of Aboriginal culture and ways of becoming a supporter, ally, and advocate. I think it was Amber's presentation where she talked about becoming an advocate, ally, or supporter. I found it interesting that to be considered an ally, a non-Indigenous person has to be given that title from an Aboriginal community leader, which I thought was interesting. Throughout this unit, we had a number of guest speakers, which include Karen Jackson, Lisa Thorpe, and Carol Q. All the presentations were great, fantastic. One thing that stayed with me was Lisa Thorpe's passion and commitment to Indigenous identity and care for First Nations children. Through her work with Bubap Willem, I hope I'm saying that right, Lisa emphasised the importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander-led programs as opposed to paternalistic forms of governance. I like the idea of the organisation building on the strengths of service users and reconnecting children with their families and culture. This is opposed to the deficit-based models of governance implemented by predominantly white politicians who believe they know what's best for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I like the idea of solidarity and enduring indigeneity despite ongoing colonialism. This speaks to the resilience of First Nations people, refugees, and other people who have recently migrated to Australia. As a social worker, I'll be guided by the AASW Code of Ethics 2020, which stipulates that we acknowledge the intergenerational trauma experienced by First Nations people and advocate for change to structures and systems that preserve inequalities and injustice. Lisa stated that one way of achieving this is to allow First Nations people to run their own services for Indigenous children. Advocating for programs that include Indigenous cultural educators as part of the curriculum is one way I could become a supporter or ally of Indigenous people. I really made a conscious effort throughout this unit to remain respectful and listen to other people's perspectives, even if I didn't always agree with them. I think the colour of fear prompted me to listen to other points of view that I may have never considered. I think the diversity of students help bring different cultural perspectives to race and working ethically in Indigenous communities. What surprised me was a few students who had recently migrated to Australia knew more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history than other students who were born in Australia, myself included. Reflecting on my own education in primary and secondary school, we learned more about becoming a federation in 1901 and the settlers than we did about the plight of First Nations people, which is pretty ironic, considering that Indigenous populations have been here for 65,000 plus years. It's pretty disrespectful, in my opinion. In the third week, I was asked to present a reading to the class about the Anti-Colonial Asian Alliance. I found this article interesting because I'd never heard of the organisation before. The article was an interview with someone from the Anti-Colonial Asian Alliance. There is this idea in Australia that Asian settlers are a model minority, which in itself I think is a racist label. There's also an expectation that Asian settler communities are invited to take part in the ongoing dispossession of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. However, many people from these Asian communities have resisted against colonial forces in their homelands, so they maintain a commitment to the prospect of decolonisation in Australia. So this is where we have seen acts of solidarity between the Anti-Colonial Asian Alliance, refugees, and Indigenous groups who share a common goal. Previously, I wanted to advocate for Indigenous human rights and social justice, but was never sure about the best way to go about it. The concept of knowing myself before advocating for others makes sense, because by acknowledging the history of myself and my position as a white Asian male growing up in Australia, It'll help me unpack my own personal biases and values that may negatively affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. A term I hadn't heard before but found interesting was the invisible backpack. This term relates to privileges that become so pervasive that it becomes normal and doesn't feel like anything at all. I think it is dangerous. I think this term is dangerous because it can lead to us to believe that racism and other forms of discrimination are normal. So in order for myself to become an agent of social justice, it would be important for me to become aware of the experiences and attitudes that have become second nature to me. That concludes